we really have to remember is that even though BioWare owns Mass Effect and owns or created Dragon Age and created Mass Effect, they are not the same teams. They're completely different teams. So a lot of people think that what happened to Mass Effect 3 is going to happen to Dragon Age 3. That's why a lot of people are so nervous, because they're like, it's going to be the same thing. They're going to do the same thing. And then there's also that whole a lot of people consider Dragon Age 2 being a flop and like not doing well. And a lot of people actually consider it being bad. I've never gone to the extent of saying that Dragon Age 2 sucked or that it was bad or that it was a flop. It had its flaws. It did, but nowhere near to the point where I would say that it sucked. But that's just a different opinions, and I totally respect that. Mass Effect is a different genre, and Dragon Age is a completely different genre. So we can't compare the two. The only way we could compare the two is EA. That if EA does the same thing, it might turn out the same. That's the only thing. But here's the hopeful part. When listening to the team, this team, the Dragon Age team, is a little more sure about themselves than the Mass Effect team. And more importantly, the Mass Effect 3 team. Because I've listened to a panel of the Mass Effect 3 team, and they sounded very unsure of themselves. I'll put the link in the description. I think everybody should watch this video because it really shows how the Mass Effect 3 team, Mike Gamble states, and I'm not even making this up, he states in that video that they ended up screwing themselves, and I'm using quotes here, screwing themselves at the end of Mass Effect 3. And it's kind of disheartening to hear them say that, because they're pretty much saying, yeah, we screwed it up. And the reason why is because there's so many variables to consider from the past games, from Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2, and to bring it into Mass Effect 3. And here's why. Mass Effect 2 is a direct sequel from Mass Effect 1. They continue. Mass Effect 3 is the same. Mass Effect 3 continues from Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2. They all continue. They're all continuations of each other. So what Mike Gamble said was that because there were so many variables, because there's so many options, because Shepard is so customizable, because of all that, and because it has returning characters throughout the whole games, there were so many variables to consider for Mass Effect 3. So what happened? They ended up, and this is another quote from him, they ended up contradicting themselves and ended up screwing themselves in the ending. And one of the guys was even there just to show how many variables they had to consider. And it was huge. It really explains the feeling that the team had. It was a very stressful situation for them. Dragon Age is a completely different experience, a completely different situation. I think the best thing that Dragon Age has, especially for Dragon Age 3 right now, is that each game hasn't been a direct sequel. Dragon Age Origins was a game in itself. Dragon Age 2 was a game in itself. It had some things from Dragon Age Origins, but it wasn't a continuation. It was just some stuff that would come up where you're just like, oh, cool, I remember that. Dragon Age 3 is the same thing. It's going to be a separate game. Some things are going to continue, like some of the storyline, but it's not going to be a direct continuation of Dragon Age 2 or Dragon Age Origins. So they don't have... This is the best thing that they have for themselves. They don't have all that package to consider for Dragon Age 3. They'll be like, oh, you know what? Let's take bits and pieces from here and there. Let's take a little bit from some of that, some of this, and let's incorporate. Let's answer this. Let's answer that. And another thing is that they've never said that Dragon Age was a trilogy. They're not limited to, oh my God, we have to end it because we said it was a trilogy or something like that. No, there's probably going to be more Dragon Age after Dragon Age 3. So there's no limits there. They have a bigger chance for this to succeed if they really, really try. BioWare has always been known to work closely with the fans. With Mass Effect 3, there was a whole different thing going on there. It was just internal weirdness going on. The lead writer, Drew Karpyshyn, all of a sudden just leaves during the development of Mass Effect 3, and he says that he's going to go focus on writing the Star Wars novels. And it's just like, this guy has been the lead writer of Mass Effect since Mass Effect 1. He was there since Mass Effect 1, Mass Effect 2, and then all of a sudden Mass Effect 3, he leaves? What? As a writer, you would never just abandon your baby like that. There was something going on there, and I think, and a lot of people suspect as well, that there was some kind of pressure going on with EA, and Karpyshyn just didn't want to be a part of it. They'll never admit this. I think it's really when EA started to really like come down on BioWare. In Dragon Age 2, you kind of we're seeing a little bit of it, but EA kind of has transformed into like another type of monster since Mass Effect 3. I think that's why things just turned for the worse. But I think BioWare saw, and EA, I think EA should have seen what happened with Mass Effect 3. So they always say that they're not separate from EA, that they are EA, but they have to say that. They're owned by EA, so they can't say anything else. For people that know BioWare for a long time and like really know the way that they work and their products and stuff like that and their games, you really know that that's not how they really feel on the inside. You know that they like to produce well-written stuff. Like BioWare has produced some of the greatest RPGs out there, in my opinion. And not just like the recent ones. I mean like going all the way down to Baldur's Gate. And I really don't believe that they've lost that. That's their passion. That's what they do. That's what they're best at. So hopefully after that whole pressure and just internal craziness that was attached to Mass Effect 3, they kind of maybe learned from it, I hope. And I hope EA kind of backs off a little bit. But I'm pretty sure that there are some things that BioWare just can't do without the consent of EA, and I'll go into that a little bit later, which is regarding what happened today, the article. And some people have told me it's their own game, they could put out whatever they want. But like I said, BioWare has always, and this used to be one of their mottos, like they're all about the fans. Mass Effect 2, a lot of what was in Mass Effect 2 and even Mass Effect 3 was from petition of fans. Like the Garrus romance, that was all petitioning from the fans. They weren't going to add that, if you know. So the fans were the ones that were asking for it. So BioWare put it in there, along with a bunch of other stuff. They've never kept the fans out of the loop, except for, you know, the whole drama that happened with Mass Effect 3. But like I said, that was all internal weirdness going on and running out of time and that kind of thing. And here's another thing that people are always comparing Dragon Age with Mass Effect. They say, yeah, well, they said that in Mass Effect, for Mass Effect 3 as well. They said you're going to have decisions that matter and all this stuff. And people were complaining, saying that they didn't in Mass Effect 3, especially with the first ending, the original ending before the extended cut. People were saying my decisions didn't even matter. But you can't really compare Dragon Age with Mass Effect, because Mass Effect is more of a shooter than anything else. It's like a shooter RPG. The genre is action RPG, but in this case, it's more like a shooter just because it's sci-fi. You've got guns and all that kind of thing. And that's one of the reasons why multiplayer kind of just like melded into it, even though I wasn't a big fan of it. It melded into it and it worked to a certain extent. More so for some and then less for others that just aren't too big of multiplayer type of people. Dragon Age is fantasy, so you can't really compare the two when it comes to but they said that for Mass Effect. In Mass Effect, they were focusing a lot, it seemed like, on the action, on the combat. The RPG was there, but I think it was more of an action shooter combat-based game. I mean, I would have liked to see more RPG in it, but it still worked. I thought Mass Effect 3 was a great game, especially because it was a war. It was this like full-on war, so obviously the action was going to be amped up. For Dragon Age, it's a little bit different. Fantasies tend to go very well with RPGs. They tend to meld right into them. Like RPGs and fantasies just go well with each other, because fantasies aren't really about the combat. They're not really about the fighting. They're not really about guns and shooting people. They're more graceful. Even though there can be a lot of action, it's more of a graceful take on it, like swords and like more old school type of thing, like chivalry and knights and these amazing armors and stuff like that, and magic and that kind of thing. So for example, Dragon Age Origins, it had a lot of like action stuff in it, of like an action game. It wasn't a full-on RPG, but it was more of an RPG than anything else. And just the way that fantasies are written in general, there's more of a sense of romance there. And not so much like, oh, I love you so much. No, not that kind of romance. But like that feeling of focus a lot on the story and focus a lot on the characters. Mass Effect was more about the mysterious, the unknown, space and the technology and that kind of thing. But it's just different. It's a different feeling. So with Dragon Age, I could totally see them focusing more on the story, more on the RPG aspect of it, because the combat isn't what makes Dragon Age Dragon Age. It's the story and the characters. That's what it's always been about. So I really think that they could focus more on that than they actually did in Mass Effect, because in Mass Effect 3, it was about a war against these machines that were going to pretty much end the galaxy. And in Dragon Age, there is a conflict. There always has to be a conflict in a story, but it's more of a human versus human conflict. But it's not so much fighting for your life. It's more about fighting for a cause. It's more about fighting for a belief. It's more romantic. It's more like defending what's right kind of thing. I mean, when it comes to something like Dragon Age, I know that a lot of you love the series, and I love it so much, and I really would hate to see it do bad. But I really, really think that we should go back to that excitement that was there, like when Dragon Age 2 was coming out, when Dragon Age Origins was coming out. I was ready to blow up. And now it's just a different feeling, and I don't want that. I don't want to feel that way. I want the hopeful part for this game to be more than the nervousness. I want to be able to trust this team. I've said this, and Scottish Warrior 92 has said this in the past as well. I trust in Gator, just because of how passionate he is, and he's been one of the lead writers in these types of games since Baldur's Gate 2. He knows what he's doing. So it's all up to however you feel when it comes to this. I'm not here to persuade anybody or anything. I'm just here to share my thoughts. But yeah, it's just too good of a series to be attaching like negativity to it, especially when we're seeing that this team is really, really trying their best to put out something that is worth our time, and that is considered to be worthy of the series. They said this as well. I didn't add it onto my notes, but they really want to return to the way that Dragon Age Origins felt, and not so much Dragon Age 2. It seems like they really, really learned that in Dragon Age 2, it was kind of bland, especially comparing it to Dragon Age Origins. That's like the best news you could ever hear, is that they want to go back to the way that Dragon Age Origins was. They too agree that Dragon Age Origins was amazing.